One more question from the audience, and then we'll move on with our agenda here. And this goes back to supply chain. It's a great question. The question comes from Trin, and it is this: what are the key learnings, and what can we do now to ensure that our supply chain improves? Do we forget now? Do we now forget? This is an interesting way to put it. Do we now forget the just-in-time idea that we were all sort of, in love with pre-pandemic? Because look what happened when we couldn't even get tips for our pipettes, she says. How are we going to help with our patient mission without the very fundamental need for research as tips? So I would just kind of encapsulate that, form that question up like, what improvements are you making, and do you anticipate making within your own companies and for the companies that you're working on behalf of? That would be John and Adrian. To ensure supply chain resilience, to ensure that, to Trin's point, you've got your tips. So Jeff, let me add. Oh, no, go ahead, John. Was that you?
Yeah, sorry. So, from our perspective, I think the big thing we're seeing is a real focus around resiliency. So, even companies that have local facilities are trying to have manufacturing in a slightly more, maybe 90 minutes away. And how do we? And then also looking as they design those facilities to figure out how do they make them more resilient within themselves. So how can they incorporate flexible, portable, disposable technologies that allow them to quickly adapt towards different processes, shifting away from large stainless steel vats and into products like, there's a local company called Cytiva that has, a whole platform of manufacturing, technologies that allow companies to really be more flexible in the way they produce that. So I think as we look at therapeutic and biologic resiliency, I think that's some of the technology is catching up, and companies are having it more baked into their mentality. The large manufacturing facilities offshore, we saw some real flaws with that system through this. So I think a lot more companies are looking at how can they have a more resilient geographic diversity as well, and where they locate their manufacturing.
Yeah. Adrian, Lakes is looking to build the premier, contract development manufacturing organization in the United Kingdom. You've got to look at the past 2 years, the supply chain situation, and say, well, we're going to need to get our hands around that if we're going to accomplish our mission and serve the biopharma industry the way that we intend to. So how do you intend to do that?
Yeah. Look, I agree with many of the comments. I think one thing to highlight is that the supply chain resilience and just-in-time sort of thinking, that they don't necessarily need to be mutually exclusive. I think the notion of certainly ensuring the robust supply chain capability through better assessments, better considerations around agility within the supply chain are really important. I think there is still a place for just in time, because for me the two things come together. I think in the UK what we've seen particularly is a need to increase the manufacturing capability, and therefore onshore some of the manufacturing capability to the UK to shorten that supply chain. And that's where Lakes BioScience will sit very clearly. But I think, there's a danger that we, in some respects, throw the baby out with the bathwater with, resilience and overstock versus just in time. I think it is a case of being much clearer about the supply chain capabilities and doing much more collaborative working. Interestingly, I think many companies are working more towards having partnerships in place with the supply chain to make sure that they're not shortfalled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jeff, has that been the case at Heat? Can you share? I mean, did you have any particular scary supply chain moments over the course of the past 24 months, and how are you addressing them, if so?
Yeah, it's a very difficult issue because, as Adrian points out, you have to be cognizant of oversupply. And oversupply is a major issue because it many of the reagents and the bags or other disposables have a shelf life, and if you don't use them within the shelf life, their value drops down to zero. So, a lot of real economic considerations. It's very expensive to plan for resiliency, and even items that you don't expect to be in need have a vital effect on your ability to manufacture. So it's very difficult, and the only way to really do it adequately is oversupplying everything you need, and take the hit if you need to, if you don't use the materials. But that also leads to an increase in cost. So it's difficult. So it's a balancing act, but it's something we all need to be aware of, and we've seen this with this pandemic. All of the materials that were in short supply that inhibited the proper functioning of the manufacturing ecosystem.
Yeah.
And let me just echo Jeff's comment there. I think, and I've said it a couple of times in this discussion, resilience does come at a cost. And we've got to balance out as an industry where that cost sits, whether it sits in the private environment or the public environment. But at the end of the day, it comes at a cost, and it's got to sit somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that could in fact be, just to go back to an earlier point, that could in fact be a proper role for government to really help ensure if resilience is important, and if private companies don't have the resources to adequately supply for this resilience, maybe that is a place where where government can step in and say, well, we'll pick up the shortfall to ensure no disruption in the supply chain.
It's the immediate and simple analogy that comes to my mind is is infrastructure, right? The current administration's pushing a big infrastructure deal. A bridge just collapsed in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago, and President Biden was there saying, like, I'm going to fix this bridge. So maybe some of this infrastructure for the business of biopharma are those fundamental supplies. The innovation, that's Heat Biologics and the clients of Massachusetts Biomedical Initiatives and Lakes BioScience. It's a good way to look at it. I want to hit one more polling question, and I want to have a discussion with you guys on your perspectives on this question as well. So the polling question is, what do you consider the most important characteristics of an agile development and manufacturing response to population level threats of infectious disease? So again, sort of a discipline-specific answer set here. Indication-specific expertise, flexible or modular manufacturing environment, an agile CDMO/CMO partner, public health agency collaboration, a quickly scalable manufacturing environment, development and manufacturing staff training, a secure supply chain and safety stock, emergency funding, or regulatory speed and agility. And again, here we're looking for your top 3 responses. So give us your top 3 responses. What are the most important 3 attributes of agility? And let me flip that question over to you guys. Jeff, since I've got you on screen, I'll start with you. What would you sort of characterize as the most important considerations for creating an agile platform, such as rapid vax at Heat?
I think there's a number of important considerations for this. So, you need to have a system that can respond quickly, and not only in terms of building the actual drug to respond, but also manufacturing, distribution, and most importantly, getting enough clinical supply to start clinical trials immediately. So that's really what our rapid vax system is focused on, is getting into the clinic as quickly as possible. Because while you're in the clinic, you can really scale up on the manufacturing piece, but the timer doesn't start until the clinical trials do. So I think I think that's a really important piece of the whole puzzle.
Yeah. John, I want to pose that question to you like this. You know, if you're entertaining a startup as a client at MBI, and you need to give them, you know, one or two very pointed pieces of advice about their formative years and making sure that agility is baked into what they're doing, where would your focus be?
Well, I can tell you a little, Matt, about what we're trying to do within the organization here. So, you know, one of the MBI provides early stage space for companies from the earliest seed stage, and we're now extending that ourselves to now and start including scale up space where companies can really start to grow through a Series A round and you know beyond. And we're designing all of that space with the eye towards manufacturing. So, you know, we've created these spaces in a way that those companies can start to implement their own process development capability. They can start to even do phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trials to try to, you know, make it easier for them to get through those early stages and scale in one location with great support all the way throughout. So we're trying to provide, you know, that supportive infrastructure to make that process easier for companies because we recognize how difficult it is. And you know, the biggest advice that I'd give early stage startups is what I give them all is to really be focused on, you know, what is the market for your opportunity and who is your team. And if you have those two things, you're positioning yourself to take advantage of, you know, flexible infrastructure and to get yourself to market as fast as possible.
Yeah, yeah. Adrian, on the manufacturing side, you bring your manufacturing perspective to the table here, and give us your thoughts on what are the most important attributes of agility and response.
Yeah, I think again, for me, having that flexible modular manufacturing environment, and that's the bigger environment in my mind. It's not just the processes, it's also the people and the ability to for the operations people to flex their thinking around manufacturing. I think the second piece for me is that the supply chain needs to be well thought through. Back to the previous question, well thought through and integrated. And I think that the third piece in terms of being able to respond is, and we've mentioned this a number of times, the public health agencies being very integrated in our process and working in a collaborative way. I think one of the things that we've seen over the last 2 years is a much close collaboration, and everyone's benefited from that, and long may that continue.